I'm a big fan of this passage from Matthew, but I'm beginning to think that it might not like me as much as I like it. As many of you know, we follow the Revised Common Lectionary, or the RCL, and that's what assigns what the readings are for each week. It's an interesting system, as preachers often have to wrestle with texts that they might not have picked for themselves, like we saw with last week's gospel reading. Probably the coolest thing about it, though, is that it means that on any given Sunday, the same Bible passages are being read in churches across the country and around the world. Because it's not just Lutherans that follow this lectionary, but the Catholics and Episcopalians and Methodists and a whole bunch of other denominations as well. It really helps promote the idea of our individual worshiping communities being a part of the global and universal body of Christ. So why all of that matters for today is because the lectionary is on a 3-year cycle, which means that the last time this text came up was in February of 2020, just before the world ended. Pastor Laura was out of town, so I was flying solo that week, and then I got the flu. At the urgent care, they gave me a mask to wear until I got home. And I can so clearly remember walking into CVS to get my prescription, wearing that mask, and getting all these weird side-eyed looks from people. Now, maybe I was imagining it, but I don't think I was. And little did they know, I was just ahead of the curve. A month later, and that style would be all the rage. I did my best that week to focus on resting and recovering, and I also tried to write a sermon, hoping that I would be feeling better by Sunday. But late on Thursday night, in a flu-induced haze, as my eyes went in and out of focus as I stared at the computer, I realized that just wasn't in the cards for me. I made an SOS phone call to Pastor Bill Harmon, and I promptly crawled into bed for a few days. So you can imagine how excited I was when this salt and light text came up in the lectionary rotation again. I mean, I already had part of a sermon written, although that is a somewhat liberal use of the word sermon. A couple pages of fever-induced ramblings might be closer to the truth. But regardless, I was excited. Pastor Laura even graciously agreed to rearrange the preaching schedule so that I could have this text. And then on Tuesday morning, I tested positive for COVID. Luckily, it hasn't been nearly as bad as it was when I had it this past summer, something that my doctor attributed in part to my having gotten the most recent booster. So get your boosters, folks. But still, first the flu, now COVID. Pastor Laura, you might need to take this passage when it comes up again 3 years from now. Maybe it'll like you better than it likes me. And it's a real bummer that it doesn't like me, because there's this t-shirt referencing this passage that I have wanted for quite a while now. As many of you know, I'm a big fan of funny and slightly irreverent, religiously themed stuff. My favorite by far is a shirt that says, "Jesus took naps, be like Jesus," referencing the time that Jesus took a nap in the boat during that massive storm on the Sea of Galilee. And the one that's related to today's reading simply says, "salty and lit." Salty in this context, meaning slightly grumpy, cynical, even sarcastic, and lit being a multi-purpose slang term that's most commonly used to describe something that is awesome. Now, clearly, that's not exactly what Jesus was getting at in this passage, especially the salty part. And yes, it has occurred to me that I might be the only one that finds that shirt hilarious, and that I've been struck down with these illnesses to spare all of you from hearing that terrible joke. But if I got sick every time I told a bad joke in a sermon, I'd never be healthy. Plus, as you'll hear later on in this sermon, I'm pretty sure that Jesus does think that we're all lit. So it's not entirely off base. But enough of this preamble. Let's take a look and try to figure out what exactly Jesus was trying to say when he said, "You are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world." It's somewhat hard for us to grasp the importance of salt and light in Jesus' time, given how commonplace they are now. They're everywhere. You walk into almost any kitchen in the world and you'll find salt, usually a few different varieties. At my house alone, we have the classic Morton girl with the umbrella salt. We've got sea salt both in a shaker and a grinder, and somewhere way in the back of the cabinet, I think we have some pink Himalayan salt from when I tried to make Kahlua pork in the slow cooker. And think about light. With the flip of a switch, we've got light in every room. We've got street lights, camping lanterns, lighters. My roommate in college had this hiking headlamp that he would use late at night to read while I was trying to sleep. Heck, I barely even need a flashlight anymore because my phone has one built into it. But in Jesus' time, both salt and light weren't nearly as easy to come by. Far from there being a salt shaker on every table, salt was a highly sought-after commodity and trade item. So if anyone out there needs a little morale or ego boost today, Jesus is basically calling you a hot commodity. Did you know that Roman soldiers were paid partially in salt, and that's where the word salary comes from? It's fascinating, right? And the same is true when it comes to light. In Jesus' time, they basically had two options, the sun or fire. And once the sun went down, the activities that were possible were limited to stuff that could be done by candlelight or firelight. So when Jesus says that you are salt and light, he is in part making a statement about your inherent worth as a person. He is saying that each and every one of you is precious, that you are worth something, that you are beloved and valued more than you even know. And given my last PG&E bill, I'd say that part about light being precious and costly is absolutely still true. But in all seriousness, these words from Jesus are a wonderful affirmation of our personhood. And they should inform how we treat both ourselves and how we treat each other. Because we all struggle with our own self-worth from time to time. We all wonder if we really matter, if we're worthwhile, if there's anything special about who we are. And contrary to what society tells us, that our worth comes from what we have or what we do or how much money is in our bank accounts, Jesus cuts through all of that to the core of who we are and names us beloved and precious and rare. Now, another thing that Jesus was getting at with this metaphor has to do with how versatile and multifaceted both salt and light are. They both serve so many different purposes. In a time before refrigeration, salt was one of the best ways to preserve food and to keep it from spoiling. It was used to fertilize the soil, to cleanse, purify, and disinfect, something I could have used both this week as well as 3 years ago. And of course, just like today, salt was used in cooking. And think about light. It illuminates our days, helps us see where we are going. Light from the sun provides us with essential vitamins. It helps stabilize our mood and fights off depression. It helps plants grow and produce food and recycle carbon dioxide and provide the oxygen that we and other animals need to survive. Light provides warmth and power. Based on where the sun is in the sky, we can tell not only what time it is, but what direction we are heading. It orients us. I could keep going, but I think you get the point. Salt and light serve many different purposes. They are essential to life, and the same is true for you. You have been blessed with your own incredible and special set of skills. Whether you believe it or not, there is something unique and wonderful that you, and only you, can bring to the party that we call life. Passions and talents and resources that will bless this world as well as the people in it. And we learn that the true value of those gifts that we have been given is found when they are shared. The ways that we have been blessed fully blossom when those gifts are used in relational ways for the sake of the world. Salt by itself is rather unpleasant to eat, but add it to a dish at the right time and in the right proportion, and it not only adds its own flavor, but it enhances and brings out the flavors of the rest of the food as well. It builds up whatever it comes into contact with. Salt helps those other flavors realize their fullest potential, and that's how we are called to live as well, building one another up as opposed to tearing each other down, living not just for ourselves, trying to get what's ours and take care of number one, but realizing that we are all inextricably linked with and connected to one another, part of a massive web of existence where each one of us matters and where all of our actions have an effect on someone else. And we are called to honor that interconnectedness with intentional and responsible behavior and action. Now, the last part of this passage that I want to dig into has to do with the grammar that Jesus chooses to use. He doesn't say, "You are supposed to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, so get your acts together." Nor does he say, "If you do X, Y, or Z, you will finally become the salt and light that I always wanted you to be." He says, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." These are declarative statements by Jesus about our innate identity, about who God created us to be. There's no works righteousness here. This is only gospel and grace. There's no need to earn this title, nothing that we are called to do or to be in order to deserve it. All that we have to do is simply be who God created us to be. Now, that's not always as simple as it might sound. We live in a world that so often tries to tell us who to be, how to look, how to act, what to say, but we are called to just be ourselves. Because the person that God created you to be is awesome. Dare I say, lit. The person that God created you to be is precious and rare and versatile and beloved. And God never wants you to feel like you have to hide who you were created to be. Jesus said, "No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house." That verse was translated into the well-loved song, "This Little Light of Mine." Hide it under a bushel? No, I'm gonna let it shine. In part because doing so would be dangerous. Flammable basket plus heat source equals trouble. And the same is true when we try to suppress or hide or disguise the amazing and wonderful person that God created us to be. And that whole charade is liable to go up in flames. And as those things tend to go, it'll most likely be at the least opportune moment possible. It's also foolish to hide that light because it defeats the purpose of lighting a lamp or a candle. As theologian Matthew Bolton said, it involves a fundamental, even reckless misunderstanding of what a lamp is, how it works, and what it is for. You are not made to be hidden, Jesus insists. You are made for shining, for illuminating, for giving light to all in the house. Just as we talked about with salt enhancing the flavors that are already present in the food that you add it to, light also truly realizes its purpose when it is shared for the benefit of others. You, shining bright for all to see, helps other people walk around with confidence and precision and purpose. Now think about how you walk around a dark room, especially a dark room that you are unfamiliar with. Timidly, with unsure, shuffling steps, and more than a few stubbed toes and bruised shins. But when you stand up and claim the person that God made you to be, you give others permission to do the same. You can inspire the same confidence and assurance of self-worth in those around you. That's why I love this passage so much. There's so much depth to these metaphors, such powerful meaning when Jesus calls us salt and light. It speaks to our inherent worth, our value. It speaks to our multi-faceted nature, the wide variety of our skills and talents. And it speaks to the importance of relationship, the importance of using those skills and talents for the sake of the neighbor, of not hoarding what is precious and rare, but using it to bless others. So really, this is a stewardship text. It's a vocational text. It's an affirmational text. It's an instructional text. It's as complicated and nuanced as the metaphors that it contains. So go forth into the world, dear people of God, being salty and lit. Amen.